correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm here with my friend Steve.
Hello, Steve.
And we're going to talk some RPGs. But before we get into that, let's talk about our podcast of the week.
Yes, podcast of the week this week is Eberron Renewed, which is a pretty cool little podcast here on the D20 Radio Network that, as you might guess, centers around the world of Eberron. Now, they're an actual play podcast, and their first campaign, which I forget, ran 150-some episodes or something crazy like that, was using 5th edition D&D. Their second campaign, used the Genesis engine, and I've lost track of how many episodes they're up to, but very, very good. They're deeply into Eberron, and it's very good role play as well. The whole cast and crew are really, really cool people. And kind of as a side note, the last couple of weeks you've heard us talking about Gamer Nation Con, which will be happening again this year, April 4th through the 7th. Am I got my dates correct off the top of my head, Steve?
Yeah, 4th through the 7th. And it is, Dallas Games Marathon, Plano, Texas. As you hear this, the Kickstarter will have wrapped, but that doesn't mean you won't be able to get anything.
Right. You can check there. There should probably, eventually there should be an update once they get the tabletop.events link page going. There'll be updates and so forth. And once I get that link, we'll throw that in our show notes as well. But I bring this up because last year we got to meet at least 3 of the cast from Eberron Renewed.
I believe so, yeah.
I know. I played a game with GM Eric. Actually, I GM'd and he played, but and I know I got to talk with I believe Philip and Jeff, and I know at least based on the Kickstarter that at least GM Eric is planning to come again this year, and I would expect others as well. And like I said, they're really cool people. It's a really good con. So check out Eberron Renewed, check out the Gamer Nation Con Kickstarter page, and if you can make it, it's a great little convention to come to, and Steve and I'll be there. So,
well, yeah, you can come and harass us in person.
Yes.
Well, you had our topic for this week.
Well, sort of. I more of a concept than a topic, and I'm not even sure. It's more like a word, and that word is space. And by that, I'm not thinking in terms of outer space or like space, like Star Wars or Eclipse Phase or anything like that. Was thinking more along the lines of space, both as like the physical space you use for a scene or a whole adventure or even a whole campaign, but also like the concept of like player space and how you play the game and a bunch of stuff. And it just struck me that like the space you set a scene or an adventure in can do a lot of things to how that feels when you play it, because you've got not just the, what do you want to say, like the volume of the space, right? Like, is it a big space? Is it a vast open space, or are they in a tight little, corridor, hallway, and I think there's things you can do with that to change the feel, of a scene by changing the space it's in.
Well, I think it's we got to think about it in the way that we think about movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's helpful to think about it in the way that we think about movies. So in movies, when we want something grandiose, vast, and awe-inspiring, it's typically set in these massive open environments. And when we want something either creepy or stressful and confined, we set it in these dark and small spaces. Think about it this way: the in A New Hope, when they go into the trash compactor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That scene starts and it shows you how big this room started as, and it's like, okay, there's a lot of space here, but half of the room is filled with garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that by the way it's shot, and that there's not much space to the ceiling, there's no visible floor underneath, and the walls are closing in, and we're running out of air, we're running out of space, we're running out of room, we're ratcheting up the tension, we're increasing the suspense, and it's using physical space to do that. And I think that's what you're sort of driving at with this idea.
Yeah, but I think to counterpoint that, you can, in a sense, reverse that. Think about like, and it's probably not the best example, but I don't know why it's stuck in my head. Um, was it the Liam Neeson movie, The Gray,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just vast, basically empty space, and it's oppressive because it's empty and it's so big.
Right, and that can be oppressive, and it can be daunting, and that can be another thing that open spaces this do provide. And there are movies where small spaces provide comfort and reassuring. I can't draw any like major ones to mind, but the idea is there,
Right, right.
and we can use both of those concepts as well. I think it's important to keep in mind that the space at which you play the space at which you set your locations sets a lot of the tone.
Hmm. Yeah, I think maybe that's kind of where I was trying to get to with this idea was, maybe sometimes think about it not just in terms of the space of the scene you're actually using, but the space overall, you know, and this even ties into, stuff about, like dungeon crawls and what is a dungeon crawl and do we like them, do we hate them? And I go back to someone told me recently, and if you had just said this off the top of your head to me, I'd have probably looked at you funny. But they went, "Die Hard is the greatest dungeon crawl movie ever."
Yes, it is. I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
It's a textbook dungeon crawl, but it's a skyscraper.
Kick in the door, fight the bad guy, go back in the crawl.
Yeah, like, but again, but that's again taking the space like we think of a dungeon is underground and long and windy and wide. Where in this case, it's tall and skinny and stacked and modern. And, so like sometimes I think too, a space can feel very different if you reorganize it,
Yes.
you know, or well, I'll call it a dungeon crawl movie in a way. Not a great movie by any stretch, but it's a fun action romp is Under Siege. You're on a boat.
Yeah, and think about, here's another movie that uses that's another movie that uses space to try and, you know, confine the characters. Hunt for Red October,
Yeah.
and how close they are on all of those submarines.
But you've got that in a sense also juxtaposed against the vastness of what is the undersea of the oceans,
Yeah, exactly.
you
Um,
know?
it's pretty wild stuff. And then you were talking about space. You'd mentioned something else, not to fully transition off of this, but on to something else. You had talked about
Yeah.
space when in reference to players and giving players space,
Well, yeah. So after our Monday night session last night,
which I would like to point out was the first Monday night session in like almost 2 months because
yeah,
of various life factors. So it was
yes,
really fun to get back together with everybody and have a great time playing some Havoc Brigade.
indeed it was. It was a lot of fun. It took us a second to get on our feet, but one of the people mentioned that this group has a tendency to kind of they use the term silo. And it got me again, just because for whatever reason the word space is on my head, right? And what he was talking about was how and we do have a tendency to do this where we'll start role playing, but it'll be these two people will role play. or these two people. And I don't, and it's not as much the whole table. And we're all very conscious and respectful in a way of trying to not shoehorn ourselves into other people's scenes almost to a fault, to where sometimes it's like these two people show, not on purpose. And like I said, it's being done for the right reasons, but like I think it's a thing where, again, it's a matter of being conscious of the space in a different context. And I don't know too, is some of that a function of us playing online? I think I would actually love to see the dynamic of that group at a physical table, because I think it could be a bit different. I think it would be wider interactions but still very cooperative. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I don't know the answer to that issue, if you want to call it that, right? Because
Yeah, I don't know that there is a cut and dry answer to that issue.
I think some of it is, it's online. So you have, different people, different environments, different life situations, whatever. Maybe this person tends to have more noise in their background. So they're a little hesitant to jump in because they don't want to flood the channel with background noise. Or we're just, like I said, oh, these people are doing their thing. We'll let them do their thing. It's a weird, again, it's the concept of space, but in are you giving too much space, or are you hesitant to co-occupy the space? It's sort of this weird word of the day brain ramble thing.
Yeah, it is. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I wanted to go back though to how we were talking about space more in the traditional definition, though, as far as adventures. And I think one of the things that a lot of people push back against dungeon crawls is the idea that they're stuck in whatever this space is. And I feel like that's the thing you need to not have them feel as a GM, right? Now,
Mhm.
and I intentionally said not have them feel, not not have them be, because, like, for example, you know, we talked about Die Hard. John McClane is stuck in Nakatomi Towers. The story doesn't work if he isn't stuck in Nakatomi Tower. Under Siege doesn't work if Steven Seagal and whoever else aren't stuck on a boat. But I think the trick in an RPG context is making your players not mind that they're stuck, or somehow having it set up so that they've chosen to be stuck, or at least making them think they've done that. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. So, they went on the boat willingly. They decided to go on in a fantasy game. They decide to go on a voyage. Well, they're going to be on a boat for a while. You can either, as a GM, hand wave through the journey, or you have things happen while they're on the boat that make it interesting. You know what I mean? But I think it is a game where when you've got a confined space like that, there's a line to be found of when is enough enough. Am I even
Right.
being coherent?
No, I'm sorry.
No. I'm wondering myself. Like, I feel like I'm very rambly.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm all over the place today myself. Let's roll back to a spot where we can jump off somewhere here. What was the last thing you were saying?
Talking about, like, the trick, I think, with a confined space is, or when using a confined space in the context of an RPG, is knowing when it's been enough of that and you need to change it up.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So on the idea of like a change of spaces. Um, so the inverse is correct as well. How long can you endure in wide open fields of nothing before you have to find a cabin or a shelter or a something?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can ratchet tensions with players by doing all that. And I think you can de-escalate tensions with players by doing some of that. Because we talk a lot about turn up, turn up, turn up, and never about turn down.
True.
But the fact of it is that finding that wide open space, finding that or slamming your players in a narrow hallway, as long as it's not So obviously, in context, if somebody has issues with claustrophobia majorly, then maybe don't, lines and veils exist for a reason. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
But, slamming your players in a really tight hallway just because you can, just to throw them off, especially in a system where it's like combat focused, your players are always conscious of who's coming behind us, who's in front of us, what's going on. And the ability to be like, the ability to go and limit who can be in front, who can be behind, where the whole party stands.
Mm-hmm.
It's have you ever seen, you might have seen this movie. Have you ever seen The Raid? It's
Don't think
I
so.
think it's Korean. And if
No,
I'm
I
wrong,
doubt it.
I'm sorry. Have you seen the new ish Carl Urban Judge Dredd movie?
Not yet. That is kind of on my list.
Okay, so go ahead and add The Raid as well to that list.
Okay.
And I know it's not necessarily up your alley. I think you would really enjoy that.
Okay.
There is some very tight, very focused combat that happens in The Raid that is RPG inspiring, to say the least.
Okay.
Because it's like 400 guys versus a dude.
Okay.
And it is some phenomenal combat. But it uses tight spaces. It uses both it and Dread use apartment complex hallways to illustrate fights. The reason I sort of bring those two up is because even though they were both sort of made around the same time, Dread and the Raid had kind of the same fight choreography.
Okay.
But yeah, it uses those tight spaces to cause tension and drama again, but it also uses it as a combat benefit,
Mm-hmm.
or as a how do I want to say it, narrative tool.
Well, okay. I think I understand what you're saying. I don't know exactly how to say it either. And this is kind of something now that's rattling around my head is too many times I think, and I'll throw myself in this equation, or, include myself in this statement. When we set up a combat counter, we do it in a static space.
Yeah,
We
and
do it could be in a hallway, it could be in a large room, it could be, whatever, a cave. When you're thinking about doing this, do some stuff maybe, and yes, it's a little more work. If you're using maps, it's more work, but move the fight through different spaces. Have a bit something, but then the enemy retreats and takes off down a hallway, and now you've got to chase him. And
right, no,
so
completely.
that
Move
that
the
space
fight.
is changing.
Yeah. I want to correct something I just said. The Raid is from Indonesia.
Okay.
And it's also on Netflix, by the way.
Oh, cool.
It's called The Raid Redemption. The
Okay.
first one's really good. But yeah, moving the fight, keeping, I've never been in a fight where everybody stands still. Like, I mean, literally. I've never been in a fist fight where everybody just stands in one place and punches each other. Like, that's boxing, that's wrestling, but that's not a bar fight. That's not a tavern brawl. That's not,
But how often do we do that in an RPG?
all the time.
And as a player too, right? You can do this. You can do something and, move down a hallway. Now, 5e is punishing about moving in combat and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Well,
narratively, you can just some of that stuff's hand wavy. My players love it when I do that because it's like they'll be like, "Oh, but the rules," and I'll be like, "Just it's cool. Keep doing it. You're fine."
yeah. Well, see that gets into a whole nother gripe session. But the
Yeah, I
problem
know.
is there are abilities and mechanics set up in that system built around the balance of being able to or not being able to do things, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's my response to your rules and balance. Nah.
Well, yeah. The problem is, okay, if you've got a character, someone in your game has a character that is built to take advantage of that rule structure. Now you're hamstringing them.
Well, yes, but no. There's ways to get around that and not hamstring them.
I'm thinking in particular, just again because we're kind of on the D&D thing, the Sentinel feat. Now, you you weren't there when I played the Halfling Barbarian with Sentinel, who did not use it to keep people from moving. But anyway,
That's okay. Stopping somebody from moving shortly versus stopping an entire fight from moving is two different things.
true.
And you could temporarily stop the fight in a location to do that. And then once that ability is finished, um, there's ways to get around this, is what I'm driving at, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, but I think this goes in. I know we touched on this at some point in some episode. I remember us talking about it. Like, don't always have it just be a slug out to the bitter end.
No, have your bad guys run away. Uh, especially like small fights that the players. Okay, sometimes in D&D we do these things where it's like, oh, we're just gonna get in a little fight because we haven't had any combat this game, and we want to have that because we have to. And so they'll get in like a fight with some bandits or a bar fight or something.
Uh-huh.
And realistically, if, say, bandits roll up on the camp and they rob them and the camp catches them before they get away, those bandits are going to do everything they can to run. They're not going to try and stay. They're not, once those bandits realize they're outwitted or outmatched, they're out of there.
So I'm going to throw down a challenge here, sort of, and people are going to look at me funny, but I'm going to say, well, I'm going to make a claim here that the meat of the Home Alone movies, the entire series, are nothing but an extended fight scene. And if you could get your fight scenes in your RPG to be more like that, and by that I mean it's spread out over space, it's constantly changing. It does. They don't, right? Those movies don't feel like an extended fight scene, but they kind of are.
They very much are. They very much are.
If you could somehow leverage that idea in an RPG, I think that could be really, really cool. And it wouldn't have to be the gonzo comedy that the Home Alone movies became and were intended as, right? But
Yeah, no, it's very much an extended, like that would be one of those situations where you would tell your players to go ahead and roll initiative, and then they would be confused the entire time while you put us into rounds.
well,
You know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah, like, but I think, and maybe all I'm saying is look sideways at space, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about it, that's the whole thing that happens with those movies is they're moving through different subspaces of the house, or
Yes.
to a certain point, the house, even the neighborhood in, I forget which one it is, where he's got the radio control car and crap.
Yeah, I think that's the second. No, maybe that's the first one. I don't
No, I
know.
think that's the third one, maybe. I don't know, but yeah, like they're not. Like I said, I'm not holding them up as any sort of grand cinematic masterpiece, but uh, I think there's a lesson there about how you can use space to make a fight a whole lot more interesting and make it a scene more than a fight,
Right.
which I
I
think is much more interesting in the context of an RPG.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think making something a scene more than it is a fight is especially for the kind of games we like to play, it kind of helps.
Hmm. But I think also too, right? Think of it in even in the context of a dungeon crawl. The goblins or ogres or orcs or whatever the bleep it is that live in your dungeon, they live in the dungeon. What are they going to?
Right.
Are they going to go? Oh wait, we'll stand out in the middle of this big giant room so we can all have a big, No, they're going to hide around corners. They're going to run down a passageway. You know what I mean? Like they know this place.
And the fact of the matter is if you're going to have a group of whatever in a big giant room just standing around, give them a reason to be there.
Right.
Put a cauldron in the middle and make it a delicious soup that maybe the players don't realize that's what it is. Or,
Mhm.
put some kind of something and give them a reason to just stand around. The minute you do that, you make that entire space better because it gives a reason for the space to exist. I've been in too many dungeon crawls where it's kick in the door. What's this room? I don't know. It's a brick room with a bunch of things inside of it. Kill them so you can move on to the next room.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I you know, give the space meaning? I don't know.
Yes.
I'm just
Yeah.
kind of figuring out, like, kind of brainstorming ways that the word space applies to all this in a weird way, but
Yeah, I think it's give the space meaning. I think that's really important.
think about, like I said, the fact that in the context of a dungeon, right? The things that live in the dungeon live in the dungeon. They know the space, or they should. I mean,
In theory,
you know,
they should know, this is their home.
so you know, think about it, because at our most of us as GMs like to play too. So think about maybe, run your opponents as if they're actually characters. And how
Right?
would they act in the scenario because, oh, I know there's a corner I can ambush someone from, or hide behind. There's a cubby hole down this hallway I can sneak into and they won't see me, and then I can, whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
I don't know. I just feel like space is a really weird word in RPGs because we use it a lot, but it it can just, if you actually think about it, you can do a lot with it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. I I'm going to apologize to the folks out there listening. I started a new job this week and my brain is just gone. Just fried.
I know I feel like I've got a touch of a cold and I'm not mentally as entirely with it. And also, welcome to the random wobbliness that is the inside of my head. Even more so
Right?
than a normal episode.
Right?
But, no, again, I just, and look, that's part of what we do, right? Is we're not always, most of the time, we're not trying to give you actual answers. We're trying to say, hey, think about it different, figure out a way you can use the thing. And I just think, space in the context of an RPG can be used, like, I remember I didn't listen to an old episode of Order 66, and I'm talking, this is way back in the early catalog, but I remember GM Chris talking about how most combat scenes in Star Wars happen in these big dynamic spaces where there's narrow directions and long directions and obstacles and catwalks, and you know what I mean? They don't happen in an empty hangar bay most of the time.
Right. Right.
You're being chased down the hallway by stormtroopers or Imperial guards, or you're okay, yeah, you're running through the hangar bay, dodging around crates, trying to get to the little space of your ship to get away.
Yes, exactly. You're in tight spaces, confined corners. Yeah, it's great. It's
But it's back and forth too, right? Between open
right.
spaces and tight spaces, and
Yeah, we're also having spaceship battles in the vast emptiness that is actual space.
yeah, like it really does make a really good use of space, and not in the Final Frontier sense,
Right.
to cross mix even more metaphors. Um,
uh,
but I mean,
any
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I just, like I said, I think it's something, just maybe try to put a little more thought into it in your adventure design, and maybe sometimes just as to the space you're giving other people at the table too, because we did talk about that a little bit. But I think
Right.
it's a word that can really give you a lot of food for thought in an RPG context, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think with that, let's go ahead and move into game of the week.
Woohoo! Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
So I know we gave you a long one last week. We're gonna give you a short episode this week. So
Yeah, it happens. All right, you want me to go first, or you going first?
I got mine. Mine's easy.
Okay.
I am grabbing the Darlington Press Candela Obscura core rulebook. I picked it up. I started reading it. That is the new from Critical Role. That is their new setting game system. Man, that setting is so cool.
Very cool. I don't know a ton about it, in all honesty, other than I know it's loosely, at least, based in Blades in the Dark, from my understanding.
It is. It's a group of investigators that join a secret society to confront occult horrors.
Okay.
It's very loosely based in, like, I don't know. It does kind of have the Blades in the Dark feel. It's a little bit more modern than a lot of Blades in the Dark, meaning that it's in like a fake 1930s. It's definitely got that kind of feel.
Okay.
It's really neat. Really
Cool.
neat. And again, that's Candela Obscura.
All right. Well, so you kind of went a little retro. I'm going to hit you with some more retro. Let me send you a link here because, hang on, right, proper channel. There we go. So, my game of the week this week, and I don't know crap about this as a game, but the concept looks fun. This is called 45 Psychobilly Retropocalypse.
Uh-oh. You have my attention.
He was a mutant with a gift for the guitar and an eye for the ladies. She was a hot rod racing bombshell on the lookout for love. It crawled from the wastes of Nashville Crater, seeking human victims. They were trapped in a world they never made. So this is set in a...
Let me go
Yeah?
get my Rob Zombie playlist.
Yeah, really?
No.
This is set in a world where World War II was fought with atomic bombs on all sides. It is a world where the B movies are real. It is it is a world where rock and roll mutants do battle with giant ants. It I don't
Yeah.
know if, like, I'm not a big, like, into, like, the whole rockabilly culture scene, whatever.
I don't know about the scene. I like the music.
That's entertaining, right? I kind of like the vibe of a lot of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, the artwork on this is very, like, pin-up 50s, you know, like the cover fits with the title, right? PDF will set you back, $8. So, it's 100 and some pages. Said it's powered by Postmortem Studios Express system. So, I don't know what that means, but it's a D6 base game. So
It looks cool. I'm excited.
yeah.
I'd like to get this on a table.
And that pulp B movie flair is always fun to have some shenanigans with.
Again, like I said, go get your Rob Zombie playlist. Turn
Reverend
that
Horton
on.
Heat.
Oh, Reverend Horton Heat, Mojo Nixon would be a good one to go on there.
But yeah, Rob Zombie also, because of the I don't know, the sci-fi vibe, the retro sci-fi B movie vibe
it's
thing.
the B movie vibe. Yeah, it's very much, and it's also the, like, if I was running this game, I would run this game like the Devil's Rejects. Like,
I still need to watch that.
You're not a huge horror guy. You might like it. I don't know. I know that House of a Thousand Corpses is considered a better movie, but I like the Devil's Rejects. He has this flair to make things disgusting that I think would play this really well, especially in his movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this would be a lot of fun. I think you could make a lot of really fun stories out of this.
Mm-hmm.
But
like,
yeah.
This, in a way, feels like a pin-up rockabilly version of Toxic Lords of the Neon Waste.
Yes, it feels like a older version of, meaning that, like, Toxic Lords is set in roughly the 80s.
Yes.
This is set in the 40s.
Yeah. Late 40s, early 50s, I think.
Right.
But yeah, no, and there is something just kind of cool about that vibe of that, the nostalgized vibe of that era. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But yeah, so like I said, that's mine. It's called 45 Psychobilly Retropocalypse. And just in case you don't feel like trying to type that out, we'll put links to everything in the show notes like we always do.
Yep. And as always, like Steve said, links to everything are in the show notes. Please leave us a review on wherever you're listening to us to. If you feel like supporting us, come join our Patreon. If you can't support us and you can't leave us a review, at least come join our Discord. We have a really active group. We try to keep that group really active. And I've mentioned this before, but the more people that are in the Discord, the better.
And we will steal things you post to make show topics from, even if you don't intentionally do that. But we also take suggestions.
I am trying to get better at posting in the Discord.
Yeah, I'm not as active in it as I was, just because my work setup has changed a little bit. I'm not as able to just pick up my phone randomly and
Exactly. I feel that. But yeah, we want to thank everyone for listening and remind you to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.